Hello, welcome to another episode of HealthTech Hustle. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Adam Turinas. He is the CEO and founder of HealthLaunchpad, which is a new firm that helps technology companies grow their healthcare business. And he's also a mentor towards two startups in the TMC Innovations Accelerator program, as well as Capital Factories Accelerator program. So I'm excited to have him on as a guest and allow him to share his story and what he's doing in the space. So with that being said, Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rodney. Really appreciate it. Really happy to be part of it. Really excited about what you're doing here.
No problem. So let's kind of just jump into it. Why don't you give the listeners a little more insight into your background and exactly what you're doing in the health space?
Absolutely. So I'm an accidental healthcare entrepreneur. I started a health tech company in 2012 completely by accident. Before that, I'd spent about 20 years in marketing. We're doing all kinds of different types of marketing: financial services, entertainment, travel, technology, a lot of technology work, mostly digital. But I never did healthcare. And I started a little consulting firm, and I was just helping big companies with their overall communications. And I was having breakfast one day with a great friend of mine who's a physician, and his name's Stu. And really charismatic, really smart physician, very experienced guy. And he said, there was a big problem, a big communications problem in healthcare. This is going back to 2012. And the problem is that the relationship between healthcare systems and their medical group was broken, in his words. And that was a real problem because, the hospitals, healthcare systems depended on the physicians for their patients. And the physicians were increasingly dependent on the healthcare system because of the change in healthcare shifting to Obamacare and value-based care and all that great stuff. And so we decided we would try and do something about it. So we started a little consulting firm called Navio Health in 2012. And we started working with hospitals. And I'd say that our first efforts were real trial and error. I remember the first meeting we had with a hospital. It was the worst meeting I've ever had. It was just, I had no idea what I was talking about. Uh-oh. And really made a bit of a fool of myself. But thankfully, the nice thing about healthcare is the people are generally pretty decent people. They're in it for different reasons. They're not all in it for commercial reasons. And so it generally sort of attracts quite nice people. And so I think they took pity on me and my partner. And they still hired us to do some consulting for them. And anyway, so that was back in 2012. And then it's sort of about 6 months into it, you thought, I think it's we had an idea for an app. And we started brainstorming and, we sort of thought what the app could do. And it was all kind of geared towards communications and making it easier for physicians to communicate with each other and making it easy for the healthcare system to communicate with the physicians to kind of, sort of kill two birds with one stone, if you like.
Okay.
Anyway, so we pitched that idea to a guy called Joe Scott. And Joe, at the time, was the CEO of Liberty Health System in New Jersey. And he said, you build that, I'll buy it. So we said, okay, Joe. And so we went off and we found some developers, a couple of guys in Columbus, Ohio, who had developers around the world. And we worked out what a minimum viable product would look like. And it then took about 6 months to implement it. Involved encrypted messaging so that, it had to be HIPAA compliant, right? So that meant that there was from a technical standpoint, that we had a lot of thinking to go into to make it HIPAA compliant and fully encrypted and all of that good stuff. Anyway, so at the end of 2012, we went back to Joe at Liberty Health System and said, okay, we're back with our app. And he said, okay, you can try it out with some of my doctors. And we did a pilot for about a month with 30 of his physicians, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. They said, there's so much technology that we've forced to use that we hate, and this just makes our life so much easier.
I was geared directly towards the doctors, the app?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it was specifically for doctors, but, clinicians in general, but primarily, we started very physician-centric. Anyway, so at the end of a month, we couldn't take it off them. And so we thought, we got something here. And so then we actually, we then built out the product properly. We had the iOS version, Android version, the web-based version of it, with a bunch of enhancements that we needed to do. And we launched the company. And the company initially the app was called Practice Unite. And we, within about a year, we had half a dozen healthcare systems on board, which was really hard. Really, really hard. I've sold in so many different industries, and I've never sold in anything that's as tough to sell into as healthcare. Sales cycles are eternal, very risk averse. And we were a couple of guys and, a part-time CTO. And frankly, we had day jobs as well. None of us were actually doing it full time. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors to start with. But it was a legitimately HIPAA compliant product. And our customers loved it. And, we had good sort of early adoption and good early usage and started to get some momentum. We were able to get some press after a year, some really, really PR for the application that basically we were able to demonstrate that the app was saving one of our customers $2 million a year. Wow. And that went viral, or as viral as anything in healthcare anyway. Not quite Beyonce Instagram viral. It was, viral for healthcare anyway.
Niche specific virality.
Right. Yeah, right. So, we then got some real momentum, and we got a reseller on board, and the head of the reseller so liked us enough that he made an investment, brought on some other investors, and things were going on. And then about 2016, we were getting really worried because we tried to raise money from the VC, and the VCs were, we had dozens of meetings. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I lost count how many meetings we had. And we kept hearing the same message. And it was basically, look, you guys have got a great product. You got a good team. You got a great track record, but we're still not going to invest. And the reason we're not going to invest is that the market's too competitive. And frankly, they were right. There were 100 competitors in the space. And so, they were right by their own standards. I mean, that was like, we didn't agree with them, but, I can see why they said it, right? It's, there were a lot of companies in the space. So I was really worried, actually, because I thought we were going to run out of money. Despite, on the surface, everything looked like it was going great. We'd hired up. We had a really good team. We're still running it pretty lean. But the problem with running a SaaS business is that your revenue's never coming in fast enough to cover your costs. So there was the real risk that we were going to go under within 2016. And so I wasn't too sure what to do. Anyway, I got a call out of the blue by a guy called Tom. And Tom ran another company called Unify Health. And they had a kind of a product that was sort of, I would say, similar, but not that similar. So that it was sort of like what their product did added to our product, and what we did added to their product. And we actually thought that our businesses were pretty complementary. And so we put the two companies together, and we took their name. They had a better name, actually. Unify Health is a great name, fantastic name. And so we took that name. And on the back of that, these guys brought in some additional investors. So we raised another $4 million in equity. And, then we continued to grow. And, we added some really great customers. We added some multi-hospital healthcare systems in Florida, and some new and some others in New York State, some in the Midwest. And things were really sort of starting to go well. But, we struggled in a couple of areas. One area was the competition was getting tougher and tougher. And $4 million was just not enough money. What we really needed to be able to raise was probably 2 or 3 times that to be able to compete, because we just could not compete from a sales and marketing standpoint, and couldn't get the coverage that we needed and the sales momentum. So, we had a pretty good hit rate. We would close, I think we would win our fair share or more than our fair share of the business that we were pitching for, but we just couldn't get enough at bats. And then the other thing that was happening was the market was getting much, much more competitive. So, there was consolidation going on, and, the big guys like Epic were starting into the market. And so, cut a long story, we went through some pretty rough times. and, went through a restructuring, which was a horrible thing to have to go through, and, had to say goodbye to some people that we like very much. And a financial restructuring, which is painful. It was very painful. But by doing that, we got the company back on track and got it sort of financially where it needed to be. I'll say, that as much as anything. But the board, and at that point, we had some very sophisticated, experienced guys on our board, just felt that the market was getting too competitive and that, long term, we were going to struggle to really break through. And so we made the decision that we would put the company up for sale. And we went through a process. We brought on board a really good investment banker. And they went out and they reached out to, dozens of companies. And we, went through a review process with probably a dozen or so of them, and then had offers from a handful, which is what you kind of expect. And then we ended up selling to a company called Harris Healthcare. And that was in 2000. That was last year, a little over a year ago.
Nice.
And, it was a good fit. I think we filled a hole in their portfolio, and, it was a good place for to put the product, and, it was a good place for our clients and for our team. And I stayed around for about 6 months and did a transition, and got done with that transition the end of September, and then took some time off, and then thought, well, my next thing, what's my next act going to be? And, I decided I really love healthcare, and I love helping companies build a business in healthcare. And I've still got a real passion for sales and marketing, and quite a few years of experience in it. So I created HealthLaunchpad basically to help companies navigate the healthcare system, figure out how to sell and market effectively in healthcare. And it's sort of appealing to kind of three types of companies. I do a lot of work with startups. So I've mentored startups for about 7 or 8 years. And as you say, I'm involved with a bunch of accelerators, and I'm also involved with some other startups that I've been working with for a while as well. And so that's one group that I help. The second group is companies that are sort of much more mature, maybe at $5-10 million in revenue, that are trying to get to 20, 30 or 50, $100 million in revenue. And they really need to take their marketing to the next level. And so what I do is help them with their overall strategy and then get that on track. And then the third group that I serve are companies that are trying to get into healthcare for the first time, or the US healthcare market. So I'm working with a global cybersecurity firm that doesn't have a healthcare presence, and I'm helping them get into the healthcare market. And you know what? I started the company on, my timing was interesting, right? So I started the company on March 5th at 12 o'clock, and at 12:01, HIMSS was cancelled. And then HIMSS Europe was postponed, which was going to be my next big thing I was going to go to. And South by Southwest, which I'm based in Austin, that was cancelled as well. So my own marketing plan went out the window. But, you kind of, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I thought to myself, what I really want to do is start helping sort of educate, sort of like share what I've learned, at least get some discussions going around that. So I've applied myself to creating a lot of content, ebooks, webinars, that kind of thing. And it's working really well. I'm winning new business and starting lots of new conversations and having a lot of fun doing it. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be a success.
Awesome. Creating a lot of content just like we're doing now.
Exactly. Yeah. By the way, I love your podcast. I'm learning more. I'm learning a lot about how to do podcasts and watching how you do podcasts. Because
awesome. Thank you.
My healthcare startup podcast is good, but this is you've taken it to a whole other level.
It's the power of collaboration, just learning from each other, That's how you get better. Obviously, like you had mentioned earlier, how you kind of just started in technology and marketing, but you kind of broke through into the healthcare, and you kind of had a transition. It wasn't as easy as you thought it would. You said you had some rough patches, but obviously you're able to optimize and learn and grow and just stack on your successes from there. And I think that's what's really valuable to you as a consultant and helping other startups, is that you have this wealth of knowledge and experience, trial and errors that you can fall back on. And if you're a startup, that's the value that they can get, right? Because you're essentially cutting their learning curve in half by sharing what you've done, the ups and the downs.
You got it, Rodney. I mean, if I can help anybody avoid all the stupid screw ups and mistakes that I made, I'd be very happy.
Yeah, definitely. And so you mentioned you kind of were part of different companies, you merged with other companies, you're meeting different people, you're getting feedback. My question to you is, how were you able to identify that problem? Was it just through research? Was it through networking and actual conversations you're having with people? And once you were able to identify that problem, what was the first plan of action that you did in order to try to offer a solution?
A lot of it is kind of, I'd say it's kind of like well-informed trial and error. People have written books on it, right? I mean, it's sort of like the, what's it called? The business model canvas and lean startup. I mean, there are these really brilliant people who've written these great sort of how you do a startup. And at the end of the day, it's about one thing, which is it doesn't really matter what you think. It's what matters what the customer thinks. Mm. And so, we started out with an idea, a belief, if you like. There was a problem that we were hearing, right? So we were getting validation that there are many communication problems in healthcare. But what was sort of interesting was that started with one problem, and the problem that we thought we needed to fix was what's called in consulting world and what the boardroom calls physician alignment, which is a posh way of saying, are the physicians actually on board with what the organization needs to get done? Are we all working together? Are they collaborating? So we thought that was the problem that we're trying to solve. And, that feedback that we get from healthcare executives that we would meet was, that's a big problem. But when we showed them the app, they said, yeah, that's the problem. But what the problem you're really helping us with is HIPAA compliant messaging. Mm. I mean, we just said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, the big problem we've really got is that doctors and nurses are texting each other just using their regular text messaging. And the problem with that is it's not encrypted. And because it's not secure, it's not HIPAA compliant. And then, potentially every time somebody does that, that's a $50,000 breach. So what we very quickly realized is that what we thought was sort of like a feature of the application was the application. It was what the business was about. And so a couple of things happened as a result of that. First of all, we sort of doubled down in terms of our product roadmap, and that's what we're focused on. Of addressing really specific physician to physician and physician to nurse workflows and other clinical workflow issues that were all related to communication. So very granular and all about the individual users. And the physician alignment thing became a secondary message and a secondary part of the business. So it was, not strictly a pivot. It was more kind of like a fine tuning, a sort of a recalibration. But, that came from what customers and users were telling us. And then what then happened over the course of the business is that, customers would tell us what they needed. And so, at every stage of the business, our product roadmap was customer driven. And we have a great, really wonderful product development team led by a terrific CTO called Ed Guy and just an amazing head of product development called Sarah Skelton, who they really drove the thing. But we always grounded it on what were the client needs. And so everything that we did was driven by what we were hearing from customers. And that mostly worked. It didn't always work though. I mean, the interesting thing to me was that, one of the use cases, one of the big areas that we were hearing from customers, they said that they wanted help with was not just, clinician to clinician communication, but clinician to patient communication. So help us communicate our patients. So we thought this is brilliant, right? I mean, if we can easily extend out the communication from within the hospital, within the healthcare system, out to the patients. So we did that. And what we found was that while the hospital said they wanted it, they didn't really want it, or they didn't really want it the way that we were doing it. And what we found is that they would accept that we then run in. What the problem is what we then run into is that you then run into the EHR problem. And the problem is that the 800-pound gorilla in healthcare is Epic and Cerner and all those guys, but particularly those two.
Yeah.
And, once you run into that wall, you then find it's very difficult to get traction. And so quite often what would happen is that you get a request to help them with physician to patient communication. And then you sort of talk about doing a pilot, but the more they'd investigate it, they go, yeah, you know what, we're just going to do it with our EHR. It's easier to do it that way, and it's less internal problems. And so we were never able to get that business off the ground as a result of that. So, long answer to your question, but, just listen to your customers and your innovation. My view is your innovation and your ideas should be far enough ahead of your customer that they're, you're presenting ideas to them.
Okay.
But it can't be so far ahead of them that they're never going to do anything with it.
Because they'd be more like resistant to change if they're not.
Exactly.
The information that you're presenting isn't really resonating with them.
You got it. Exactly right. Yeah. If they wouldn't be able to do anything because it's so hard in a healthcare system to change anything, like financial services companies, like Goldman Sachs or somebody like that, or any of the other big banks, they're really they're commercially driven, right? They're driven by serving their clients and making money by doing that. And time to market and having a great product quickly is absolutely critical. And so you're like pressure, deliver. Whereas in healthcare, there's not that commercial pressure, right? There are so many risks. If you screw something up in financial services, people lose money, but nobody dies. You screw something up in healthcare, patients can die.
Yeah.
And so there is an understandable risk aversion. And so that means that things move much more slowly. And so we would struggle we put ideas that were sort of way too far out in front of them, and, they'd be interested, they become like these shiny objects that they're interested in, but they'd never do anything about it. And those could become big distractions for us.
Gotcha.
So it's quite difficult to sort of, if all you do is just in response to what your clients are telling you today, you're just going to be a follower, right? You're not an innovator. You'll never be a market leader. If you get too far out ahead of them, nobody's going to buy what you're one of those startups in the graveyard of startups that got too far ahead of themselves. And there are millions of them, right? I mean, it's just, so it's trying to find that window of how far out ahead of your customers you want to be.
Okay. I kind of want to get a little more clarification as far as like the customer feedback for your business. Was that after you had officially launched, or was that to just a specific beta customers in which
all the time? All that? It's before, during, and after.
Oh, okay. Just constantly.
So when we had the idea for the product, we were driving back from a conference. Stu was driving, and I had a scrap of paper in front of me, and we brainstormed, and we said, well, what if it did this? What if it did that? And he was driving, and I drew an app, right, with buttons on it. And then I took it to a friend of mine who's a designer, and she made it look like a real app. And then we created a PowerPoint deck, and then we went and pitched it. We pitched it to our consulting clients. That solves the need. Actually, I think we're really excited about that. Can you build that for us?
Nice.
And then we went off and we did that. But, as we were doing it, it didn't hurt. I mean, obviously it mattered that my partner was a physician. He was building an app for him, in the sense that he knew what problems he needed solving. And then we got it in front of some real users. And so, they really loved it, but they also gave us some feedbacks on things that they wanted to have improved. And then we go to the next customer, and the next customer would say, yeah, we like that, but can you do X and Y and Z? And so we would look at X and Y and Z. And then what would happen is that the more clients you talk to, more customers you talk to, the more ideas and feedback that you get. So then you have to develop a process for prioritizing stuff. So there's some stuff that you're going to say, that's absolutely critical. We got to do that. Everybody's asking for it. We have to do it. That's priority number one. Priority number two is we're going to get to it next quarter. And priority number three is if we can tuck that in, we're either never going to get to it, or it's something that'll go into, we'll try and fit it in, when there's a little bit of downtime.
Gotcha.
But you're always getting feedback. I mean, we would do every quarter, we would do a net promoter score survey, but we wasn't really a net promoter score survey. But what we would do is we would, in the app, we'd survey the users. So we get feedback from the users. We would meet, we have a customer engagement person, so customer success person. And their main job, there are two jobs. One was training, and the other job was bringing back feedback. So their job was to bring back feedback from the clients about, what was working and what wasn't working. And then, the leadership of the company would meet with our senior clients, because, we got up to about 25 healthcare systems, but it's a small enough number that you can talk to everybody, right? And so we would meet with our senior clients, a couple of times a year and get feedback from them. So, to answer your question, you're always getting feedback. And some of it is structured and disciplined in sort of doing surveys. And then the rest of it is sort of, it might be a bit, ad hoc, depending on when it comes in.
Okay, nice. And so I've heard you mention over the course of this conversation a couple of your team members that you've been working with. And so I kind of want to address that. And as far as running a business, running a startup, can you kind of speak to the importance of you having a well-structured team, and who played a big role for you in helping delegate some responsibility, or maybe taking over an area that you may not be as strong in compared to like the marketing or something like that?
When we started the company, we started off with sort of like the Holy Trinity, or the three-legged stool. And that was a subject matter expert. So Stu, the physician, he understood the needs, right? And he understood the needs of the healthcare systems. He also really understood the needs of the users. As well as being a doctor, he was also a healthcare lawyer. So he was an expert on Hipaa. And then the second leg of the stool is an absolutely brilliant technologist called Ed Guy. He was a PhD in electrical engineering and just an amazing programmer and problem solver as well. And so, I had full confidence then we had somebody who could build it, maintain it, and grow it. And then myself, my job is, I kind of have two sides to what I do. Yeah, my subject matter expertise is in sales and marketing, but I run businesses. So, I'm business in a generalist. The thing that I struggle with, and I think most entrepreneurs struggle with, is I didn't really have much experience in raising money, and I had to learn how to do that. And that was painful, actually. It was really, really the part of the job I like the least, and struggle with the most. The companies that do the best at raising money, often it's because they're just well connected, or they've been educated on how to do it, or that they've done it before, so that they're sort of, a lot of people find it's much easier to raise money the second time around, particularly if you've been wildly successful in the first time. And so I didn't have any of that experience or behind me. So that was kind of the core, is having a leadership team which had that balance. And then underneath that, we had some key people. And so the head of product development, Sarah Skelton, who managed to sort of, because in charge of product management, was just great because she's a fantastically organized person. We always sort of joke that, we kind of work for her, and, she just made the whole company run, the operation, the product management operation run. But she's also a really good manager and leader. And so people would follow her, and just a great collaborator. And then we just had some superb, really great developers that worked underneath that team. It wasn't, tried not to, we weren't very big. And so putting in a hierarchy would have been artificial. And so it wasn't very hierarchical. We had developers, most of our developers were in the US. We did have some developers in India as well. So, there was communications and collaboration, things that we needed to work through, but that worked pretty well. And then, sales and marketing, we added some salespeople. Some of them worked out, some of them didn't, which is not unusual. You have to make some painful decisions on that front. And same on client success. We had some people who were very good who worked out, and others who not so much, you kind of turn through them.
Nice. So you kind of spoke on like your strategy, or like your overall journey really of transitioning into the healthcare industry and really growing a business in this sector, the strategies that you've executed on to actually grow the business, and also the tools and the team that you have brought in and put in place to actually help grow and scale before you actually sold your business. And you kind of touched on some problems, whether it's transitioning or, like you just had mentioned, growing or raising money. But can you speak to some obstacles or challenges that you faced as a business owner in this sector and how you're able to overcome them?
So many.
Anyone that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I mean, raising money is definitely hard. I mean, that's just, I knew enough to be dangerous, but I really didn't know how to do it. And I didn't know, I wasn't very well connected. And so we brought on an advisor early on who worked with us for about a year. And for the first 6 months was very helpful. I mean, he actually helped us secure a convertible note, convertible debt, and did a good job there. But then actually when it came to doing like a proper seed round, he was not the right person to help us. And that was painful because it cost us, it just wasn't the right fit for us. And so it just cost us 6 months of time at a very critical time. And that was painful. And, the other issue that we had was market timing. So some of our competitors had raised tens of millions of dollars. And so we were a bit late getting to them. And because of that, by the time we got to the VCs, they kind of concluded that I'm not so sure that we're going to invest in you, that the market may have moved on. So that was a really, really tough thing to go through. The other thing that was challenging was once we did we put the two companies together and we raised money, we then had a then managing a board of very, very senior, seasoned executives. These were high net worth guys, who were very accomplished business people, and pretty challenging to manage. So that was challenging, but some downs. I mean, there's a guy I used to work with who was a founder of a company that was ultimately successful, said, basically running a startup is a series of near-death experiences, hopefully with a great success at the end of it. And that's certainly how it felt. I mean, I would say, the 7 years that I ran that company through its various iterations, toughest things I've ever dealt with. A lot of them I can't really go into because they get quite personal, and making some very difficult decisions. It was a painful decision, when things were really very bad way financially, that having to lay off a large chunk of the staff. And that's, maybe unfortunately, I'd been through it before in previous companies. And so I knew what to do and how to do it. And so I could get through it and get everybody else through that. But, for somebody who's never done that before, going through that kind of reduction, that restructuring can be crippling. Right? Some people just never. I remember the first time I did it, which was about 15 years ago, I never really recovered properly from that. So, there are some things that, unfortunately there's no, other than experiencing it, there's no other way of learning it.
Nice. And so kind of got one more question for you before we end podcast. You kind of gave us a whole spiel of the goods, the bads, from the very beginning to actually selling your company and having some success at the end. So what advice would you give to other health tech companies who are either starting out or a couple chapters behind you in their journey?
Best piece of advice I'd give is, it sort of kind of depends what stage you're at, right? So I think early on, the really good bit of advice I got from somebody was that to be successful, you need two things. You need relationships and you need money. And that's more the case than in any other industry, because it's a very difficult industry. If you've not been in healthcare at a senior level for a long time, it's a very difficult industry to penetrate. So you need the relationships to help you navigate that. And you need more capital than you do in other industries because the sales cycles are so long. So that's the other thing. The second thing is, this is a piece of advice that I was given, that is something that I couldn't really do much about, but it's one of those things which is, if I was ever to do this again, I think I would make a priority. And that is, who your investors are is as important as who your customers are. And I'm so grateful for the people who invest in our business. I really owe them everything. And they're great people. They were all individual investors. And the ones that could went out of their way that had connections, went out of their way to try and help us and were successful in doing that. There are other guys I've spoken to, who've actually, like me, or maybe on the second time at bat, who have started their company with some of the really high profile healthcare VCs on their board and have immediately connected into some of the high profile accelerators like TMC in Houston and Cedars-Sinai in LA. And that gives you such an advantage because, most of us are scrapping from little hospitals that want to give you a shot to try and get to the big guys, right, that have got the big budgets and the big profile. If you're able to get connected to a Cedars-Sinai or a TMC or both in some cases, and you've got, that then gives you access to some of the highest profile healthcare systems on the planet, and then gives you're kind of first in line for the investors who are investing in your space. And the fact that those accelerators have endorsed you says that you've got a market there. And that's what I almost wouldn't do a healthcare startup again unless I could check those boxes, because it's so hard otherwise. Yeah. But again, I'm terribly grateful to all of the guys who invested in us, and they all went out of their way to try and do the best they could for us. The ones who get into those high-profile accelerators or who have relationships with the really top-tier healthcare VCs are in kind of like the space. It's like kind of going to an Ivy League university. Once you get in that, you can kind of write your own ticket. It's like, and then the rest of us are scrapping. Right? I didn't go to an Ivy League, so I can say that.
All right, man. I feel like that was a very jam-packed, value-packed episode right here. But now we're nearing towards the end, and I kind of want to end it on a little lighter note. We've been talking about some very high-level stuff. So kind of have a little fun exercise I like to call the rapid fire round, where I ask you a couple questions, and whatever answer you come up with. Okay. All right. First question: what is your favorite book of all time?
A Voyage for Madmen. It's my passion. One of my passions in life is sailing. It's about the first single-handed solo round-the-world yacht race, and it's just an amazing story.
Awesome. Who is the most influential person in your life or career?
My dad.
Awesome. What is one goal that you want to accomplish this year?
Actually, it's pretty straightforward. Personal stage thing of accomplishing it, which is that I'm new to Austin, and so want to just settle in Austin and sort of get ourselves sort of relaunched here, which we kind of we're underway doing, and then the whole coronavirus crisis thing sort of threw that for a bit of a loop, but that's fine. I'm really passionate about what I'm doing with HealthLaunchpad, and I'd like that to be more than just a little boutique consulting firm. I hope it's actually a community of people who are passionate about this issue, which is sales and marketing in healthcare and how to make it work better, because it's kind of doesn't work very well.
Yeah. Okay. And last one, what is one piece of advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Oh God, hey, that's not fair. I asked that question in my podcast, and and I'm always stuffed by it. You know what? I think it's so corny, but kind of believe in yourself, in the sense that it took me a long time to actually have the guts to actually do a startup. And my only regret with startups is I wish I'd tried earlier, because I think for most entrepreneurs it takes 4 or 5 goes to really get it right. And I'm running out of runway.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, I think that's a great way to end today's podcast. Adam, I just want to thank you again for just sharing your valuable insights and your personal journey and your story of how you're able to go from sales and marketing, break through into the healthcare market, have success, and just fill us in on some strategies and tools and the team that you had put into place, and just the value of having a good network and relationships and money. So I know I got a lot of value out of this, and I know a lot of other people will as well. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you, Rodney. I really, really appreciate it. And keep doing what you're doing, man. This is just great that you started this podcast.
That's awesome. Content creation, man. So is there anything you want to share? Any last words? Where can people find you? Any websites, social media they can follow you?
Well, thank you for asking. So my website is HealthLaunchpad. So that's healthlaunchpad in one word.com. And you can just email me at adam@healthlaunchpad.com and or find me on LinkedIn, Adam Turinas.
Awesome. Well, that concludes today's episode. Catch you guys later.